Welcome, ladies and gents. Chris Andre here. You can find me at BetBoxing on Twitter for boxing-related tweets, or you can subscribe to the channel and get notifications whenever I upload a new video. Let's talk boxing. There are loads of videos I want to bring this week, talking about a whole bunch of different topics. For this one, though, I'm not going to actually talk about the Joyce Dubois fight in this video. I'm going to bring a technical breakdown for that. For this video, I want to discuss one thing alone, and that is the mentality, the effect of the psychological effect on Daniel Dubois of the accusations that he's quit. I want to talk about whether he did indeed quit and what this means for him in terms of going forward, whether this could actually catapult him into more success, which no one's talking about, which we're going to talk about how that could occur, or how it could really damage his career and ruin his career, and he will always be, a Jeff Lacey type figure where he was a hype job that people will say he was a hype job and he never lived up to it. So let's talk about that, okay? Firstly, let's start with some of the things that people have said. So obviously you've had a whole bunch of fans on Twitter talking about how he's a quitter and now he's done this and he's done that. You've had a lot of fighters that have come out and said it. David Hay said he didn't like the way he went down, inferring that he quit. Frampton said the same thing. Tony Bellew has gone online and suggested that too. People have been trolling Tony Bellew saying, did AJ quit Tony? Because, obviously they're talking about AJ against Ruiz because obviously Bellew really rates AJ and puts him on a pedestal. So there have been people teasing him about that. But the fact of the matter is the general narrative is that he's a quitter now, or he has quit, and that he can still come back. People are saying, but it's gonna be a very long road back. Dillian White came out in a scathing retort, based on the fact that I think there've been some back and forth between Dubois and White. So a lot of people have been saying a lot of things. Anthony Joshua came out and actually said quite a noble thing. Anthony Joshua came out and said, look, in MMA you have fighters that tap out and nobody holds that against them. It's not frowned upon in the same way. Whereas for some reason in boxing, if you quit, it's held against you. It is very different though. So before we go into this in detail, one thing I will say, the difference is that with MMA, when you are in a position to tap out, the reason it's different is that you are not in a position where you can win the fight. There's literally nothing you can do to turn the fight around. You are locked into a specific lock, and if you do not tap out, you are either getting choked unconscious or you're having a limb broken. There is no way back for you. It's not like the Dubois situation whereby, personally, I had Dubois up by a round. I'm not going to go too much into it. Like I said, that's for another video. But I felt that Joe Joyce was winning the fight in real terms. In other words, from the middle of the fight, even before the middle of the fight, I felt that Joe Joyce was going to win the fight, that it was going towards a knockout for Joyce. There was too much success he was having. It was affecting Dubois far too much for him to be able to last the full fight. Like I said, we'll go into that in another video. But the point is that Dubois wasn't out of the fight. It wasn't the same as being in a chokehold with 2 minutes to go of a round where you can't breathe and there's nothing you can do. You've already lost the fight. It's just about how much more damage are you going to accrue before it becomes official. You cannot win the fight. It's different in boxing because you could hold on or you could land something big and win the fight by a knockout. It's different. So although what he said was, admirable, it doesn't really stand when you're analysing this. Now, did he quit? Look, in real terms, you'd have to say he quit. Eddie Hearn also wanted to throw his 50 cents in there, which I thought was quite funny. Eddie with his sly but not so sly insult. He's sitting there and he's saying, look, it's very difficult for a non-fighter to call a fighter a quitter, but you have to listen to other fighters and they say that he quit, and it became evident from the middle of the fight that he didn't fancy it. So he's basically called him a quitter and then pretended like he's not, which was funny. Frank bit up obviously. But look, he stopped fighting. From that perspective, it's a quit. But you have to understand something, right? When you've got a broken orbital bone and nerve damage, the orbital nerves and the cranial nerves start from the top of the skull and they go back into the base of the skull. And it's the same with the optic nerves. They go straight through. So whichever way you look at it, the nerves on the head go directly into the brain. There are some other nerves that are wrap around the spine, and they'll shoot off from the spine. This goes directly into the brain. If he's got damage on the orbital nerve, shot, a continued shot into there, you could tap it. It could feel like a dagger into the head, into the brain. This is not like, an ankle injury or a wrist injury or a broken hand or a bad cut whereby, you can still, your body's still, you're still able to fight back. This is next level of pain potentially. We don't know what he was feeling, but even if he wasn't in that much pain, but he just figured, look, this is a very, very serious injury. Imagine he does hold on, he doesn't quit, he carries on, he wins the fight, he gets the result, he wins the fight, but then he goes blind as a result. Well, all right, you won you won a Commonwealth. I think the Commonwealth was on the line, right? You won a Commonwealth title and a British title, but then your career's over. Well, no, they're prize fighters. He's better off walking away, logically speaking, and coming back to fight another day. But obviously in this sport, which is so unforgiving, you're having a lot of people just jumping down his throat. But whichever way you look at it, however lenient or unforgiving you are, the fact is he did quit. So how can it affect him? Well, one thing I'll say is this. The first time, psychologically speaking, that you break any sort of barrier, the easier it becomes to break that barrier again. So let me give you some examples of what I'm talking about. Let's say you've got a young woman, she's 16 years old. She meets a boy, she really likes him, she cares about him, they've fallen in love as far as they're concerned, but she doesn't want to sleep with him, she's a virgin, so she waits. And 3 years pass, they're 19 years old, now she's ready for that big step, they sleep together, a couple of months pass, he decides, you know what, I want to go to uni now, it's not going to work long distance, he ends it. It breaks her heart, she's devastated, she's crying for a year, she's 20 years old, she meets a new guy. It's very unlikely that she's going to make that, statistically speaking, and there are individual differences before anyone says anything about that, but generally speaking, it's very unlikely that this 19-year-old girl is now going to wait another 3 years with a new guy that she's met to sleep with him. No, she's not going to wait that long, typically speaking, because the concept of my virginity is very sacred, I don't want to lose it. Once she loses it, it no longer becomes that thing of, I need to protect it again. She's broken a barrier and it becomes easier to cross that barrier again. It's easier in the sense for her to say, look, I've done it before, I've slept with a man before, I'll sleep with him again, this guy again. It becomes easier. Not just with that, it could be things like drugs. You take a very hard drug for the first time. If your parents have spent their whole lives warning you not to dabble, you dabble, you might think to yourself, oh, you know what? It was hard to do, but it wasn't, the consequences weren't that bad, actually. I don't feel like anything happened to me. I'll try something harder next time a friend offers it. Next thing you know, a couple of years pass, you're addicted to crystal meth. Now, obviously, that's a very extreme example. I'm not saying that anyone that dabbles is necessarily going to go to extreme drugs, but it opens up a route for you, okay? It becomes easier to then push new boundaries because you've broken that first boundary and it's easier to cross. This is how it happens. In school, for instance, if you're, in a rough school and you've always had this thing where you could never back down, if anyone puts it on you, you have to fight back. Otherwise, people are going to laugh at you. They're going to mock you. When that kid, the first time he does back down, when he realizes, okay, a few kids laughed at me, but it wasn't the biggest of deals, I got through it, he's a lot more likely the next time it gets put on him and he's a little bit afraid to reinforce those old feelings that he had of relief when he walked away. He's more likely to walk away again. Whereas the kid that has never walked away because he can't handle the prospect of, rumors going around the school that he's somehow afraid or he's a coward, he can't handle it, he's a lot more likely to not take it, not take that step of backing down when someone unjustly steps to him. Okay, so it's all about these barriers in life. Okay, it can apply to all walks of life. Well, Daniel Dubois has broken that barrier of quitting now. He's quit once. As Tyson Fury once said, I think it was to David Haye, if you swallowed once, you'll always swallow. Well, now that was a bit of an unfair criticism with Haye and a very crude way of putting it, because David Haye didn't quit against Klitschko when he hurt his toe, but it was an excuse he used. And if you noticed, he became afraid of using that excuse again, which I'm going to get to later. When he had a real excuse against Bellew in the first fight, he could have used the excuse and no one would have held it against him. He was so afraid of the toe being used against him, he didn't use it again. And that's key here, because this is what I'm talking about when it comes to Dubois and how he could go either way. He's broken that barrier. So on the one hand, he could end up quitting again. But there's a flip side to that coin. How is he feeling now that all these things are being said about him? If Dubois is taking the thought process of, look, it's not the end of the world. I'm young, I can come back from this. It was a bad injury, I quit. You know, people can say what they want. I don't care what people say. You know, who's criticising me? Some guy called, I don't know, Gary from Dagenham on Twitter or something. Some fat dude eating Cheetos and spilling salsa down his old grey, used to be white vest and you know, with his fat tits hanging out, and he's sitting there going, he's a quitter. I don't care what these fools say. If Daniel Dubois takes that mentality, whereby it rolls off his shoulders and he couldn't care less, then it becomes a scenario where he thinks, well, you know, if I'm in a situation like that again, even if I quit, who cares? It's happened before and it didn't really affect me. Why would it affect me again? I'm making money. I'm, you know, still going to be a very dangerous fighter. I'm going to be an entertaining fighter. People are going to want to watch me. I've got time on my side because I'm a young fighter. So even if I lose, what's the big deal? Whereas if he's taken it to heart and he feels embarrassed and he feels furious and he's sitting and he's thinking, how dare these scumbags talk about me like this? These fans that have never gotten in the ring, I want to slap them all. David Hay coming out and disrespecting me. Why don't you put your gloves back on, Hay? Let's do this. If he has that mentality, then he could be in a situation where he becomes a very dangerous man. And I'm going to give you some real life examples of that. Vladimir Klitschko. When Vladimir Klitschko was early in his career, he was a very aggressive fighter and he would often punch himself out. And a lot of people would question whether he had heart. He had a stamina issue for sure, and he didn't enjoy taking a shot. He wasn't as hard mentally and emotionally as Vitaly, but often he would punch himself out. He wouldn't pace himself very well. He didn't have a great inside game, so he was brilliant at other things. But because of that lack of an inside game as well, and you know, perhaps his chin wasn't the best, he didn't really want to get into wars. And Manny Stewart on the documentary of the Klitschko brothers' careers, Manny Stewart talks about how they were in the street one day. And the street guy, man, he says, came up to Vladimir and said, hey, you're that guy, you're Vladimir. And Vladimir was like happy, like, you know, I've been recognized in New York. You're that guy, you're that heavyweight. You're that heavyweight that got knocked out. You're a quitter, right? You're the one who's got no heart. And Vladimir's face just drops. And Manny Stewart gets so angry at the disrespect, he wants to go and batter the guy himself. And Vladimir's holding him back and saying, leave it, you know, just leave it. He's an idiot. But it affected him so much, Manny said. It affected him so much. He couldn't live with being mocked like that. He hated it. So he adapted. He worked hard. He adapted his whole style. And at 41 years old, when he's going through hell against Anthony Joshua, it would have been so easy for him after a stellar career to stay down in round 5 when he went down. But he didn't do that, did he? He got up. He went to war. He dropped AJ. He nearly took AJ out. From what rumors say, you know, Vitaly told him not to put his foot on the gas, to pace himself, and that proved to be an incorrect tactical decision. Or maybe he punched himself out because he also looked very tired when he was trying to take AJ out when AJ could barely stand up. Whatever the case might be, he left pretty much all of it on the line when he didn't have to at 41 years old. Why? Because he was afraid of being called a coward. And he has said in interviews since then, in a weird way, it was the perfect way to go out because he got more respect, he said, for that defeat than he'd got for any other fight in his career. Despite all that he achieved, one of the great heavyweights, he's recognized more for a defeat. And he loves that respect he got from that. Think about that. That's how much it hurt him being called a coward and being called a quitter. But for every Vladimir Klitschko, there's a Malik Scott. And Malik Scott was a very highly touted, very talented heavyweight who was beating Derek Chisora. And we know one thing about Derek. Listen, he always gives a good account of himself, even when he's been to the highest level, elite level. He's a handful for anybody. But one thing you also have to say about him, he puts it on you. He turns it on. You're going to have to work hard to beat Chisora. Now, with Malik Scott ahead in their fight, him eating all those body shots, he packed it in. He didn't want it. And once he quit, because he wasn't bothered with the criticism that came his way, it became easier for him to quit again and again and again. When he fought Luis Ortiz, he wasn't interested in an exchange. He spent the whole fight running. And I hate that phrase. I hate the phrase in boxing, a fighter was running, because the ring is the size that it is for a reason. You are allowed to use it all. But when I say I hate the phrase, I'm talking about Mayweather moving around the ring and boxing. I'm talking about, I thought Triple G beat Canelo, right? But say the first fight, for instance, Canelo was on the back foot and he did some really good stuff. And I saw a lot of people say Canelo was running. No, that's rubbish. Getting on a back foot and fighting off the back foot is not running. You're using the ring. So it's a phrase I hate. Malik Scott against Luis Ortiz was running. He was not using the ring. He was moving without throwing punches. He did not want to exchange. He had the foot speed advantage and he just didn't want to exchange, and he was happy to just move around the ring for 12 rounds. He was literally running. Post-fight interview, he turns around and says, yeah, you know, I didn't do myself proud today. You know, it was an unacceptable performance. I've got to look at the drawing board. And he's talking like he doesn't care, like it's a matter of fact, like, yeah, all right, yeah, you're right. Because he doesn't care what people think. Listen, Malik Scott was a highly rated prospect, world title contender, compared to the average Joe on Twitter. Like, he'd smack up, you know, everybody that's talking rubbish about him. He doesn't care what anyone says. 6'4" guy who's gone on to become a chief sparring partner of Deontay Wilder. Like, he cares. This brilliant athlete, natural athlete, what the average Joe says. So because it rolls off his back and he doesn't care about the criticism, he's just sitting there thinking, listen, I'm making my money. And he's a very eccentric guy. He's putting up photos of him with scantily clad women in bikinis and thongs, and he's sitting there smoking his cigars. He doesn't care. He's not affected by what people say. If that happens to Dubois, where he sits there and he thinks, all these clowns mugging me off, I don't care what they say, well, then he could end up becoming another Malik Scott or a Jeff Lacey type character, who Jeff Lacey wasn't a quitter, but Jeff Lacey, that highly rated prospect that never fulfilled it, that could end up being Dubois. It could end up being that he just doesn't perform like he's expected to perform. He doesn't have the career that he was expected to have. Let me know what you think, guys. How will it affect him? What, you know, do you agree with me in terms of how it affects him could change the trajectory of his career? Or do you think that it's set in stone that one thing is going to happen now? And if so, what is that thing? Where do you see Dubois going from here? Thanks for watching. Chat to you soon. God bless and take care.